Yeah.
Just to frame things to help people who maybe don't understand the situation quite as well. Can you guys explain what the splits look like between amateur and professional in your leagues and in leagues around Europe, for example? So how many true professionals do the teams traditionally have versus how many are local players who came up through the club, something along those lines?
I know here in Switzerland, and I know the situation in Denmark is different, particularly at the moment. But we have 3 full-time professionals. We have a small number of our guys who have come through our regional talent school, but we have clubs with 1 professional and all local guys, and we have teams at the top of the table who are almost fully professional. I would guess that most lower mid-range leagues are pretty similar. They've got teams who have a probably more of their starting group are professionals, and I think I know if Jakob wants to talk about the situation in Denmark, but yeah, for me it's probably quite similar to a lot of leagues where you've got a range from 1 or sometimes none to teams which are almost fully professional.
Yeah, I'd say it's a good mix in Denmark as well, from teams as us being half pro, half amateurs, to some teams being completely filled up with pure amateurs, and something in between with some semi-pro Danes as well. The average is pretty tough to say because I think it's very diverse, but having all the spectra, not completely pro rosters in Denmark, but at least half a starter or so.
Yeah, when I was in Sweden, we were allowed 3 foreign players. So Sollentuna only had, I don't think they might not have had any, because I think they were committed to local players at the time. I think most of the rest of the teams had the full 3. Obviously, they're your starters because they're the ones you're paying the most money to. In my case, the 3 pros were the 3 foreigners were the only ones getting anything meaningfully from the club by way of salary or anything like that. The rest of them, there were a couple of girls who were still in high school. Everybody else had a job, so definitely amateurs. The reason I wanted to bring that up, because I think as much as this discussion is going to be kind of framed mostly in terms of professional versus amateur, we can also think of it, well, maybe not we in this conversation, but people watching can think of it also in terms of scholarship, this side of discussion, like in the U.S., where in the men's game you have, I think it's 4.5 scholarships you're allowed, and you can split that up as many ways as you like, but you might have 20 guys in your roster. Some guys are going to have money and some guys aren't. In women's volleyball, it depends on the level. I was just coaching in Division II where you're allowed 8. Again, you could split it up where everybody gets some money. You could have a certain number of players get full scholarships, and you sort of mix in between. Traditionally in Division I, you mostly get either a full scholarship or no scholarship. So I'm hoping that this conversation kind of is something that people in the college game can also latch onto.
Yeah, well, all of our guys get something, but not, for some of our guys that might be 50, 100 francs a month. But really, it's sort of a recognition of their commitment of time, and something for us to also say that your time is valuable to us, but that we then can also make some demands of that time.
Yeah. Just for real quick before I let you in, just for people who are paying attention or not paying attention, haven't focused. We've got Liam, who's coming at it from a coaching perspective, and Jakob is coming at it from a manager's perspective to try to balance things out a little bit here. All right, so Go ahead.
And it's always a fight.
We had actually taken a somewhat similar approach and yet a different one because we don't pay our amateurs anything at all. We do bring them some goodies. We bring them clothes. We try to bring them shoes. We arrange transport. We get them try to get them some sponsorship goodies like festival tickets or something as well. But no money is included for the amateurs, and it's due to the fact that we have actually seen a lot of other clubs having a lot of problems with that. So we're having a very clear setup of having the pros and one size fits for all there, and then having our amateurs and one size fits for all there, instead of managing small different packages, which would be debatable among the roster. So we fully committed to this model. We actually go with three roster types. We have the pros. We expect a lot. They're here to play. They're here to do other stuff as well. We have our alpha squad, as we call it, in lack of better name, where this is the amateurs, the Danish amateurs, who we see a sport value in for us. They're adding into us competing. We demand something from them, but they can demand something from us as well, according to finding the balance between their other life, their families, their education, etc., and actually making agreements on what we do. And then we have a beta roster of pure talents where we don't expect the same things, but money for the latter two is not a part of it.
I think just in terms of you talked about in each group keeping everything balanced. So, for example, do you pay all of the professionals basically the same wage? You say,
yes.
Okay, we're going to.
Yes.
Okay.
We do tend to, if we manage to be happy about the foreign players we have, to commit for season number 2. We put in a bonus on that as well with our coach. But year 1 package is the same for everybody.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Liam, you were going to say something?
Yeah, we have, I guess the market sets a little bit more of the strategy here, in that there are Swiss players who are full-time professionals. So for the local guys, there is some sort of sliding scale as to what they can make. There's guys who are obviously valued enough by clubs that they get paid enough that they don't have to work. So that number is small, but yeah, we have everything from the guys who are playing for nothing to guys who are full-time professionals as the locals, and then obviously the foreign players are almost have to be full-time pros.
Okay. Do you guys want to start with kind of either recruiting side of it, or do you want to talk about squad management first? You got a preference either way?
I'd like recruiting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's something Jakob was touching on before. Is the first part is determined by what the club wants to do. That if you have a club that is really committed to their junior program, or has the goal to be winning everything, or something in between, or clubs that don't know what that is, really shapes how your recruiting works. And the coach has to work within that structure, or at least have an understanding of that structure. And then the coach has to have a really clear idea of which kind of players they need or they want for the way that they want to play. And then you have to assess things like what players do they already have that you want, what players are available, what players can you afford. Because as much as we all want Wilfredo Leon on our team, we can't afford him. So you have to prioritize a whole series of things from the club's direction to your resources in terms of human and financial. And the big part, at least for me here, I was lucky enough to have a lot of control, is that I could find the players that I wanted for the way that I wanted to play.
Okay.
So yeah, I'd like Jakob maybe to talk a little bit more about what he was touching on in terms of the direction from a club management side.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I agree with all the points. I think there's at least at the league level we are in Denmark, there is the objective that this is recruiting player is definitely a club's market. To be honest, there is a lot of good volleyball players out there for a decent budget. Yeah. We do have the luxury at our level, not to pick the top players, but a good player is a top player in Denmark. So we really have a lot of opportunities of choosing who we aim for. In our thoughts, skill and physical skills are important, but they are not enough. I would happily take number 2 skilled player on my list if the personality fits into the program we are using in. The mixture of all our projects is about the Danish amateurs staying here. Our project is about keeping our society attractive to young athletes in this particular area of Denmark. That is our main goal. We want to fight for medals now and then, but our real goal is to keep a elite environment in our back door, so that the young Danes don't have to leave from here. And in order for that to happen, the foreign players and coaches we bring in needs to understand and take care of that project as well. Meaning they're not only here to play, they're here to evolve the Danes, our Danish players. They're here to take part on the road this project is going on. So I actually tend to use a lot of hours over net, talking, explaining. Some of them might be a bit annoyed hearing about all my praising for what we do, but the reflections on how we tend to do things are actually of a big concern of us when we recruit.
All right, I've got a question that I think both of you guys can address your own perspectives, and that's how do you judge the ability of a player that you bring in, a professional player that you bring in, to obviously perform for you on the court, because that's a big part of what you're bringing them in for, but also for contributing to a positive team dynamic, because there's always the risk that you end up with a split in the squad between those who are getting paid and those who don't, for any number of reasons. You know, I've seen it manifest in different ways in different types of teams, but that's always the risk that, you know, when you're putting together a team, you're hoping to try to at least mitigate, if not avoid altogether.
The way that I approach it is that everyone's time is equally valuable, but why it is valuable to them is case by case. So for your professional guys, this is the main part of their day is to be at practice and to be contributing with the level. For the local guys, if they're working or studying, maybe it's somewhere different in their practice. But what you expect from your players in terms of their attitude and their attention when they're in the gym is the same for everybody. But the value of where they fit volleyball in their life is different. When I'm recruiting foreign players in particular, I do a lot of work watching them play, but also trying to find as many people as possible to talk to and get a feel for who they are as people and what their attitude is like, because you've got to work with these people pretty much every day. So you don't want to get stuck in a 9-month relationship with someone who it's going to be a grind to show up to work with every day.
No, and you will fail sometime.
Absolutely.
I think that this talk with them of having not testing the personality, but still stress testing by sending the same signals again, see how do they react to it is pretty key to us. Trying to figure out what, not only what value they can bring us, but what value we can bring them while they're here as pros. There's a lot of different type of players coming here. Some are going on their backpacking adventure to Europe. Some aim for a higher league. Some are just trying their youth, figuring out what they're capable of doing. Everything is here. So for us to read what a reward would be for them and figure out how do we move them in their direction while they support us. So so we follow parallel roads all the way. A lot of balancing out, a lot of talking in the start is key for us.
Okay. We got a question from Frederick. I think you more or less answered this question already, Liam, but just in case there's any more you want to add. Are you demanding more of the professional player? He says he means more training or more implication into the activity of the club, training with the young players, etc., than with the local players. And how do you manage these differences? I want to get into that last part a little bit later when we talk more about managing the squad. Yep. But we can address the first part of it.
With some guys, this is a condition of their contract. But with others, it's we have parts that all players from the club are expected to participate in. Obviously, guys who have the free time because they are professional volleyballers are available for some more things. We don't have a lot of those commitments, but the value of everyone's time is equal, but just why that time has value to them is the different part. So I don't think we have any really extremely different expectations for guys who are full-time professionals, at least with on-court things. Off-court, we have a few odds and ends, but it's covered in their contracts that they have extra commitments sometimes with the club.
Yeah, in my case at Svetala, the 3 pros were assigned to coach juniors teams. Yeah. At least once a week, and depending on schedule, to be with them for competition. Yeah. Beyond that, they probably did a little bit more physical training than everybody else because their schedules permitted it, and they might have done a bit more scouting, watching video on other teams, again because their schedules permitted it.
Yeah, what we lay out for the guys in terms of their commitment to team activities with ball practice and lifting and things, there's really not a lot of variation from the professional and non-professional players.
All right, Jakob, we got a question from Oscar.
I got an idea.
Yeah, you see that? Yeah, so he's just curious about how you're defining your overall structure, your overall strategy, and so what it means for players and coaches and everybody else who want to be part of it to be involved and to be committed. And what I would say from the U.S. perspective, it's a very similar sort of idea here. Every university, every college, even high school teams and junior club teams, they've got a set of priorities. Sometimes they're well defined, sometimes not very well defined. But there is an idea of fit. You as a coach, since we're talking primarily to coaches here, you need to fit in with whatever that's going to be. Not just go in and have your own preconceived notions of, I want to win every match I play, and that's my biggest thing, and that's what I'm going to work on all the time, and completely push aside what the club is expecting of you.
That was a long question. The coach perspective about this, we actually have debated that quite a lot the past 2 seasons, because of course as a coach you want to win everything and get everything out of it. So we actually try to work in the bonuses and the coach's contract to fit in to the long-term goals for the club as well. So players coming back between seasons are one way we are measuring what we're doing right, as well as wins. We do want to climb the ranks as well, but it's not it's somehow still an understanding of where do we measure our players to be in a level of commitment, ownership at the end of the season due to the prior. And it's tough because it's a bit of soft goals, but it has worked out very well for us. But it as well, it demands us to be very certain of what we want to achieve.
Okay. Who decides on these principles and these priorities? Is that coming from the board of the club?
Yeah, we have in Denmark we have a sports structure where all the different sports are typically built into a mother club, and under that mother club there's a board for volleyball. That board put out the strategy 6 or 7 years ago that they'd like to have a top team in Denmark, and then we put down a group of people, me and 2 other guys, who were asked to build a plan for us to achieve that. So one of the guys are good at organization. One of the guys are an absolute beast in getting in sponsorships. And then we have myself, who seems to be lucky sometimes recruiting. And we are a mix of 3 people responding to each other, having laid a plan which the mother club accepts and renews once in a while.
Do you have all these principles down, say, on the club's website that people could actually go and look to see an example?
Maybe we'll definitely have that for sure. It is written down. And it is pretty much our Bible. And on that as well, the last 3-year plan we put in when we reached the league had 3-year options of us to achieve league-wise, but it has three goals as a club as well. The one was to stop the bleed out of people leaving us. The next one was having former players make interest and come back to us, and now the last one we want to is to have Danish amateurs not being a part of the club before to reach out for us and figure out what's going on at the same time.
Okay, good. The one of the tricky things in the coaching domain, and I don't know if you had ever been through this, Liam, is when you're given a set of priorities that, the club's principles or whatever, and maybe the winning isn't the priority, for example, but later on you find out that, well, maybe winning is the priority after.
Yeah. I think at some level winning is always a priority. It's what that means in terms of actual results. So I know here, when I first came to the club, our goal is to be sort of the top of the middle. In the last season, we managed to turn that into the middle of the top. So that was a pretty good outcome for us. But I think part of the club structure is part of this question as well. Here, we are part of a bigger club, but we also have talent school, which is another part of my role, is to develop local players. And the idea is that these players will filter in, or that we can provide, we're in a position we can provide opportunities for guys who might not get that opportunity at another club, and to develop those guys because it's a cost-effective solution for us. So we can have these ideas of we want to develop people and we want to find young local talents that we can help develop and provide opportunities for. But yeah, at some point on the road, when you start winning a bit more, winning takes a little bit more priority. And to strike that balance and to make it sustainable is the challenge. So I liked my role here in that, yeah, I had a really active part in developing young local players, but I could also try and find young players on other teams who we could provide opportunities for. And then we similar to Nordenskov, where we can top that up where we have gaps with foreigners. But winning always falls somewhere in the list of priorities. And yeah, sometimes that list of priorities is a bit fluid.
Of course it is, but it's also about taking opportunities. For instance, this season for us, actually top 6 was our priority at the beginning, and we looked at the possibilities and adjusted to that as well. But I think I totally understand what you're saying, John, about that with the club says one thing perhaps means another thing. I can only say for a managing perspective over here, I love when other teams do that because it makes us look that much better when we stay honest to what we say. This small world of volleyball is a network, not where we're not very far away from each other. And I mean, being true to your goals is just spreading like a wildfire. So for us, that to be completely honest and put the goals ahead. I've had our now former coach asking me so many times, do you really mean this is how we want to do it and this is acceptable? And every single time being supportive and say, yes, that is what we want to do. This is our project. But once again, that is all possible due to a very strong plan or vision of what you want to do and the support for that as well.
And for sustainability and long-term success of the club, to have that is really important. If you're just going from season to season and you start chasing wins, or you forget about something that should be important, yeah, it's not something you can keep doing for a long time.
It's okay to change a win if the opportunity is there, but you still have to be true to your main idea. Yeah. You still have to put it over on your paper and says, yeah, we might have had a tiny swing, but we're going back and we can explain why we did that.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift over to the actual, I guess, mechanics of managing the squad during the season and the implications that having players at different levels of compensation and different levels of expectation can have. So, Liam, why don't you start us off? Where does that play a part in what you're doing in the gym and in your conversations with guys?
Surprisingly small part, actually. I, at least in recent memory, there are some guys who, if you're honest about where they are in their journey or their career, however you want to look at it, that can provide some challenges. But if there's an understanding from the start as to what their responsibility is to the team, and that no one player stands above the team, and being tough on that sometimes. And I think having that discipline and this goes a long way to keeping things working smoothly. I know that sometimes you'll get guys who are frustrated that maybe the local players are not at the same level as a professional, but then that's also part of your job to upskill those players and to make sure that they have a understanding and ability to execute the way the team wants to play. Everyone wants to be successful. No one wants to be making mistakes. And if you can see that, guys are pushing themselves and really trying to do the right things, you'll find that most players are at least understanding of that. But yeah, there has to be a pretty clear understanding from you and from the players about where they're at and where they're going and how the club and the coach and the rest of the team plays a part in getting there. So that honest discussion is really important, and you have to come back to it sometimes during the season and say, are we getting to where we want to get to? What can you do for other people to help that happen? The finding people who are willing to do things for other people which benefits them. But as a coach, it's you. The success that I've had is you try and treat everyone the same. There's no free passes. You don't get an extra opportunity because your paycheck is better than the guy next to you.
Well, okay. I mean, that actually brings up an interesting question that I'll address to Jakob. Clearly, if you're paying players and not paying certain other players, the expectation is the guys who are getting paid are going to be on the court. What happens in a situation where, like, one of those guys just isn't in that moment anyway, where now you've got one of the pros sitting on the bench? I know in some situations the manager's under a lot of pressure, or I should say the coach is under a lot of pressure from the club, from the supporters, et cetera, to the people who are getting paid to be there are actually playing.
Yeah. Well, if the pro players are having a hard time keeping the Danes on the bench, it means either of two. One could be I haven't done my job good enough, or it could be that they actually have been doing their job that great that we evolved enough on the Danes for them to compete. The first one, of course, the worst. It do happen sometimes, or we do have swings. We do have mental swings as well, being far away for half a year or more. Sometimes do stuff with people who makes them perform worse than they're capable of. Once again, I think it all comes back to being very honest to the guys who supports you and makes you do what you want to do. So this is in this case our board and our sponsors, to be honest about the situation, to have completely cleared that this is possible of happening. But we are not in this situation where we compete for every single point, to win every single point, to come in the Champions League and dominate that. That's not our task. Our task is to evolve this club and see how much it can bring us sport-wise. So transparency and honesty of what's going on is pretty key, I think.
Yeah, I won't disagree. For sure. Just to provide a little clarity, how much of a gap is there normally between the guys that are the full-time professionals and the local players, for example, in terms of talent and ability?
There's not a blanket answer for that, I don't think. We had, of our starting 7 this year, we had 4 of those guys are locals, or they're Swiss players. two of those guys have been at the club as long as they've had a National League team. Two guys are young guys who have come from other clubs or from one other club. And then we had our three professionals. But in every game, we obviously had a pretty good opposite playing for us, but we had a really good balance from everyone else. We were getting pretty similar numbers from both of our outsides, one foreign, one local. And in terms of what we expect in performance, there's some maybe individual differences, but that's player by player rather than what we pay them or where they're from. So the question of performance, I think, it's the same as what we were talking about before. It should be the same for everybody. Everybody should be able to play in a way where they can contribute, and if the coach is doing their job well, they get to contribute on a similar level. For me, practice is the chance for guys to win their spot on the court in the game. If it's the local guy because they play better, then they play.
Yeah, definitely. I would say there is my job is trying to make the gap as big as possible. That's value for our money, and makes all the decisions, all these sorts of, are we getting close to or not, getting them away, or at least to the least level possible. In Denmark, it isn't that tough to bring in foreign players who would actually be able to compete in starting position in most teams. But and I think it is to the similar leagues as well. The whole Scandinavian idea of sports is based completely different than, for instance, in the States. We don't have the college or high school programs. It's hobby based, all of it. And volleyball in Denmark, you use Scandinavia over a whole is a late starting sport. So you're pretty competitive if you come from a high school or college program.
All right. Well, the reason I bring this up, and it speaks exactly to what you were just saying about you're trying to bring in the best possible player you can for the money that you have available to you, and by extension have the biggest gap possible. So from the coaching perspective, Liam, this is why I asked the question: how do you use the senior player to develop the local player when you do have that differential?
This is a very good question. You use that guy as an example. The way that we practice, there's a lot of chance for them to compete. So if that's a guy in your position, you need to be able to compete with him. But then as a coach, your job is to say, what can you improve on a technical level, but also what can you learn from watching that guy play? Are you trying to beat him at what he's good at? Can you be complementary? There's a few different ways you can attack it. We bring in foreign players because they're better than the guys that are available locally, or at least what we can afford locally. But they have to set some sort of example. But the atmosphere at practice of competition and the mentality of because someone is there as a professional player doesn't necessarily make them untouchable. Maybe they've got a head start or something like that. But it's competition, and you have to keep pushing for competition between your players because that makes the squad better, which means everyone practices better. But as a coach, you have to look at the individual and think about their technical and mental development and giving them a role in the team.
Right.
From a managing perspective, we try to find the players who like the project as well, to be a part of developing this player on the same spot as yourself, to be able to compete with you. If you manage to narrow the gap and make this player be able to substitute you, that's actually one of the goals. We want them to find that project attractive as well when they come here. They're not just here for a playing role.
Okay, I want to extend on that, but just a quick thing for the audience. Feel free to shoot questions in anytime you want. The best way to do it is through the question and answer application. You can click on and type stuff in there, and we'll get to them. Okay, to what you just said, Jakob, and back also to Liam. One of the challenges that we always face as coaches, regardless of whether we've got half the team is pro and half the team is amateur, or everybody's on the same level, is when there's a situation where clearly one player is getting playing time over another player, and you don't see a lot of indication of that's going to change anytime soon. So you run into potential motivation issues with the players not seeing the playing time. And to your point, Jakob, clearly that's an easy thing for players to buy into at the beginning of the year. Like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. I don't mind if Jack is playing over the top of me all year. But then the season, you get into the season, and now everybody wants to play. Everybody wants to be a starter. Or if they don't, then you probably don't want them on your team so much. So, you've got to handle a situation somewhere along the way, probably with at least one player a year who's dissatisfied. And obviously the club has to deal with that, and the coach has to deal with that. So how do you guys handle those situations where, okay, it could be a young player, especially in this sort of situation, where there's a guy who's been playing for 15 years who's the obvious starter. Maybe your setter, for example. This is a situation at Svedala. I had one of my professionals was an extremely talented setter who was the starter, and there was no doubt about it. The backup setter was a youth national team player for Sweden, but she was smaller. She wasn't even projecting herself to play much beyond high school anyway. So there was a fairly large gap between the two of them, and no expectation, barring some sort of catastrophe, that was going to narrow it all. So, how do we address those sorts of scenarios?
There's different roles you can find for a player, even if particularly with young players. The obvious option is, can they develop a skill that they can make some sort of contribution on the court in games, and serving is the obvious one, or at least the simplest one to get a player into the game. But you have to show that player that you're invested in their success, and sometimes this means you pay them a little bit extra attention, or you make sure that they're getting feedback on something specific. So there's an ongoing conversation about where they're at in their development and their opportunities, and to show that you're invested in them. I think, as much as some players don't want to admit it, they have a pretty good understanding of where they are in the pecking order of things. But for you to show that you're as equally committed to their success as the guys around them, and being able to divide your attention among the team appropriately so that people feel that way. I know I would set myself a challenge for every practice that I had to make sure that I had some sort of conversation with every player. Not just to say things at them, but to make sure that there's some sort of conversation with everybody.
Okay, Jakob.
Honesty and touching base during season is having a clear vision for the individual players, where we start at, show them where we are at, and agreeing on what we work for and aiming for them is the way of showing progress for them. Of course, you will have debates about playing time and sharing play time. We accept investing a bit whenever we think the moments are right, game-wise as well. We are over in Denmark. We have a regular season and a playoff, and during the regular season, we would as well be accepting to lose at some situations in order to evolve. I'm not a big fan of the sympathy subs or very late game subs, but I definitely using the players just below the starter in the games where it makes sense to manage court time, to manage injuries, rest time, work at all. Is the way we try to please everybody, but it's not just to please them. It's actually to be stronger when we go into finals, or hopefully go into finals.
Right. Just for the participants, I'm putting a link in here to a YouTube video. When Mark interviewed Giovanni Guidetti for Volleyball Coaching Wizards, one of the topics that Giovanni talked about is something you touched, Liam, is the communication level based on where somebody is kind of in the pecking order. And Giovanni's idea that you need to spend more time with players who are further down the bench than you do necessarily starters. So I definitely recommend people listen to that. We've got a question that came in. You talk about ideal situations and your expectations. How would you deal with a best skilled pro player with a bad attitude? This is more common to women's volleyball, but if you have an example of men's, please share. I don't know if I agree with that in terms of women's volleyball versus men. And I saw Lauren on here, and she could feel free to chime in. But,
I think I can very rarely speak for Lauren, but I agree that it's not at all gender specific. I know last year here we had a player who was one of our most talented players. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, and he was frustrated. He was a guy who agreed to stay because he was looking to move to the next level, and Switzerland is a good league to be a showcase. And he would be frustrated, and he'd say, we would talk, and he said, I know what I'm meant to be doing, and it's hard. And so, yeah, it's hard. And part of this is to say, what can we do as a team and as a coach for this to be better for you, but also to say that, you know, you have a role to play in this team, and it's not always the role that you choose. Yeah, in those situations, it's hard to get it right. Unless you can really find a way to communicate with the player and also for them to feel like the team is committed to their success and that you don't get those divisions. Yeah, it's the relationships between the team then become a really important thing to manage or to be aware of. And sometimes you have to set some pretty strict boundaries in order to make sure that people don't damage those relationships.
Sure.
I'd say,
okay. Go ahead.
yeah, I'd say nothing's bigger than the team and the club. In our case, the project as well. I have before pulled out a foreign player from the roster for a couple of weeks due to bad attitude and not committing to what we are. That's if you want to have something, you can't really compromise on that. Of course, that is a very late, and you've tried everything else, but you have to figure out that everybody wants the same, and if you don't want it, well, we can't have you.
Right. Okay. All right. This is a very direct question for Liam from Lauren. This season, Liam took one of the best players in the league on a fairly average budget for that position. A lot of other teams had similar budget for the same position and did not hire successfully. Would be worth hearing about his process on evaluating said player / trusting agent, etc.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that one up, Lauren. Yeah. Like I said, like my process when I look for a player, you have agents who are trying to sell you players. That's their job. You can't get angry at them for that. You have to go and look for yourself sometimes. I know the player in particular that we're talking about here. I watched his league a lot. I managed to watch a lot of games, looking for multiple positions, but then you sort of watch the highlights clips. If someone catches your eye, then you watch some sets or some whole games. If you're still seeing something that you like, then you can talk to their agent probably about what's financially viable, because that's always the bottleneck that you have to get through. But then the really important part for me is you talk to people. You talk to players who played with them and against them, and coaches and people around, and try and get a feel for what their character is. And volleyball is a small enough community that if you ask, people will generally answer your questions. One thing that I did this year that was new or different for me is that I would watch games against the best teams, and you watch games against lower teams and see where their level is. But I would watch and try and see what they're doing between points. That's really important for me. Their reactions, how they interact with people on the court, those kind of things. That's a value that's beyond points. As Jakob said before, there's a lot of players that are available at a lot of different price points. But within the range that you're looking, talent is one thing, but character, and Greg Popovich has always espoused that philosophy, character is probably the most important value that you can place when you're trying to make decisions between players of similar skill level.
Sure. All right. I've got a question for both of you. Phil wants to know, how have you bridged the culture differences with foreign and local Swiss/Danish players with respect to playing styles, getting everyone on the same page and all that stuff?
I can talk about on-court. I know there'll be an off-court part, which is probably easier for Jakob to handle. Volleyball is pretty international. There's obviously some different ways of doing things. There's some sort of the common language. I know Vital Heinen has rules that his team speaks a common language, even if most of the guys speak Flemish or Polish or whatever, that you have a common language. I think that's important, that there's at least some ideas that you can all have a common understanding of. The volleyball culture, I know I've been in Denmark. It's a little bit different to Switzerland, but not so different. That it's a big challenge, as long as the direction of the team and how that is applicable, or how you practically do that, is clear, and have some common language and common ideas to work on. But I'm sure Jakob can talk with some authority on trying to get people settled and integrated into off-court stuff as well.
First of all, I would say a lot of it is in recruiting as well. When you have a play style you like, for us, for instance, it's very fast-paced and risky. When you look at foreign players to bring in, well, you look at their technical skills supporting that. For the attackers, you look at how they like to take their approaches. You look at the setters, how fast their hands are, and what they tend to do, especially on the semi-broken plays. They sometimes put in the video material as well. Almost everybody can make a good video, but a lot of the broken plays, can you find video material for games not put up there as well? Yeah. Tells you a lot. So in play styles, well, it's clubs markets, so you tend to try to pick the ones who fit in what you what you like too. On the other side, English, despite my lack of skills, are official club language, at least at the league level. But we tend to we try to bring the foreign players very much into our local community as well. So they are a part of us while they're here. They are not just coming to play with us, they're coming to live with us and take part on this journey, doing a lot of social activities as well. We start team building early every single season, despite the fact that many of the players return. So we actually start a team building all over every season.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing is every season is a new team and a new season, even if almost everybody's the same. Yeah, it always starts new.
Yeah, Mark talked about that with Lauren the other day in the interactions.
Yeah, it's a good video. Everyone should watch that one.
Yeah. There you go. You change one thing and you change a whole lot of interactions.
Absolutely.
A thought occurred to me. Jakob, you're obviously in a small community, relatively speaking, with your club. And Liam, you're in a city. So what are the implications for foreign players that are coming in terms of, as you say, Jakob, you're trying to get them involved in the community, part of the community. Does Luzern do something similar with your foreign players, or do they just let the city do its own thing for them?
We're blessed in that Luzern is a wonderful place to live. It's a really beautiful city. It's a really good size. The guys have access to all the normal social outlets that they would have in a bigger city. We have been pretty lucky in that we've had guys who enjoy each other's company off the court. But I know when I was in Denmark, in Nordenskov, which is a similar sized city, but probably not as well set up, or that's probably the word I'm going to use for it, as Luzern, that weather for a lot of guys is a big challenge. Here we're lucky to have weather where you can get out and you can do hikes and be by the lake and these things. We had an American guy in Marienlyst when I was there who was just like, oh, it's dark and cold in the afternoon already, and he spent his whole life in California and Arizona. So this was a cultural change that was beyond our control. But we don't do anything particular. We're lucky to have some guys on the team who are sort of either sensitive or aware of needing to give people some company.
But it comes a bit back to recruiting as well, because if you manage to recruit the players who like to make each other better, it somehow shows off court as well.
Yeah, sure. And there is some understanding with if you're a foreign professional, this applies to me as well, in that you have to forego some things in order to pursue your dream, and sometimes that is having the social network around you. Sometimes that is you might be a little bit alone sometimes. That there's some social barriers, and sometimes that is that that your place there is temporary, and making the best of it and being aware of it, so you don't just sit in your apartment by yourself all the time.
Yeah,
which I'm having to do at the moment. So,
but we put them into coaching other teams in the club as well, quite a bit, and that is it gives us two benefits. One, they are not getting stuck in their apartment PlayStation all the time, but on the other hand, they feel committed to the club. And the other players in the club supports them the more, and we can manage to use the resources we should have used for coaching the other clubs to support up on the league project as well.
Okay. Question to you both, captains. It's not something that people spend a lot of time thinking about in the U.S. because it's different. In the U.S. sports culture, captains are different than they are in Europe and other. So what's your philosophy in terms of who you select for the team captain, for the club captain, whether it's anybody, whether you're trying to make it be a local player, that sort of thing?
We have a very clear policy, if I can start for once.
Go. No, sorry.
No, we have a very clear policy of that. We have a captain's group. One member is picked by the coach and me. One member is picked by the pros, and one member is picked by the amateurs. Within the group of these three, we find our captain.
Okay.
But the captain's group is actually the one where we tend to solve any issues we have or bring up. So we have this middle step between just the coach and me versus the players.
Sure. All right.
Yeah. I've had sort of a range of situations with this. My first 2 seasons overseas, it was really clear who the captain of the team was. And it was a local guy who'd been there for a long time and could play at a good level and was respected, and that makes it super easy. But you do have to go through the process and get some input from the players. Usually this is you have a vote, but also you can have some discussions with some guys. But yeah, like Jakob said, there has to be some sort of role for feedback and input from members of the playing group. How you divide that up or who's appropriate for it will change, but yeah, there has to be some middle ground. But in some teams, you've got to go jumps out, and sometimes it's really hard to find someone who should be the captain. And to have that group is probably the best solution in that situation.
Okay. Got 2 questions from Oscar, one for each of you. And the first one is for Liam. 95
Always for Liam.
95% of this season you played with the same starters using just a few changes. How did you manage a good mood and good motivation for the bench players?
Some of this was pragmatic in that guys were not 100% fit and healthy. But the opportunity to compete almost pretty much every day at practice, in that if you wanted to beat a guy, you're going to get a couple of hours on court every week to try and beat him. And like we touched on before, the communication between guys as to where they're at and what they need to be doing to try and beat the other guy or the guy in front of them. Also managing the personalities. Some guys are happy to be players on a good team, and that doesn't mean you let them relax on that, but they don't show that burning desire to be a starter. Doesn't mean that they don't get the opportunity if they're playing well enough. But yeah, you've just got to let guys feel like they're getting a fair chance to compete, and if they're winning, you have to recognize that. I very rarely played starters versus non-starters. I didn't want anyone to be getting beaten up. I want us to exist in that space where you're really fighting and have a fair chance to beat the other team.
Okay. And for you, Jakob, Oscar is interested in what your protocol is like for when you're recruiting new players.
My protocol.
Your system, I guess system would.
First of all, it's a look on the material we have ourselves. Where do we add most value to the team? Some years it's obvious, some years it's not due to the talents we have, but that's the first. Then we start to look around there. We've actually had quite a big success of looking at people being trying another country a year, but somehow failed to succeed. because we're capable of having better skilled players that way. There's a lot of reasons for players to fail out there, and definitely not all of them are the players' own fault. But we tend to look a lot of video material, some at agencies, some in our other networks, former coaches, former players. That what we have from networks is very valuable for us, because all of the guys who've been here knows exactly what we like to do, and hence able to recommend players who would fit in. But a lot of video materials, then afterwards we would go for statistics, for coach recommendations, talking with them and players as well on the side. And first then we would start talking with the players, or contacting their agents to talk with them. From there, it's pretty much not from at the point we show interest, that it's pretty much not about the playing, being capable of playing in the Danish league. From there, it's all about fitting in and personality, character. We tend to clear out there.
Yeah, I mean, from my own recruiting perspective in the States, I would say something fairly similar. It's not hard to figure out whether somebody can fit in from an ability perspective.
Yeah.
Now, at the college level, obviously, you may have to project out a little bit. But, if you're thinking of for something like a transfer, which would be the equivalent for you guys are signing a new player to play straight away, more or less. Yeah, you look at the video, go, okay, yeah, they jump high enough, they move fast enough, they hit the ball hard enough, they set accurately enough, whatever it is. That shows up pretty apparently. And then everything else is the challenging part, where you got to figure out the psychology, the mentality, what they're going to be like as a teammate, all those sorts of things.
That's a lot of stats in between there as well, because stats may not show all, but it might show something about aggressiveness. I'm not a big fan of the passing stats we get from the States, but else it tends to show a lot of how the player works in the field, service errors versus aces. You can support the idea you get from the video materials a lot by stats.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Were you going to say something, Liam?
Yeah, like statistics are important. Making sure you have those statistics in context is also important. What sort of role they wear on a team. Was the offense geared around setting a lot of first tempo or something like that? So the numbers are definitely important and are a good assessment tool and for ranking players. But to have some awareness of the context of statistics is it's the guys have to be in the right sort of range, or you have to see something that the numbers aren't showing. But yeah, to have the context for the statistics is also for me this is a factor.
Yeah, of course you can't by any means.
Yeah, go by the numbers.
No. Numbers are supportive.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we just had another one come in the chat. In a club that there aren't any professional players, how do you interact with them? Is it more important to have a good climate in the team rather than a better practice program? So basically a fully amateur club. What's that?
Why not both?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you aim for?
Right. Yeah, I think like we kind of talked about at the beginning. What are your goals? What are your intentions? Yeah, it may be the case where you're like I brought up the club Sollentuna when I coached in Sweden, who didn't really have any foreign players and thus were at a serious competitive advantage. I'm sure they had their own objectives and it was their philosophy to not have foreign players. So that was important to them.
Yeah. I know that my club here, when they started, it was all local guys and hyper-local guys, almost all guys who are either at the club or clubs very close to here. And by pushing for good practice and finding people that wanted to practice hard and get better, this builds the environment in the team. And it's not going to be perfect for everybody, but over time you can build a level where people know when they come to your club that this is what's going to happen. I think you can have teams that play really well and don't get along with each other. It's hard work to be with those teams. But yeah, I don't think having a good climate or a good environment is crucial, but I think if you're having good practice every day, guys are generally going to be reasonably happy to show up and work in that environment.
I mean, long term, if you have a good environment, the other things will come.
Agreed. All right, I think that's all the questions that we have, unless anybody wants to shoot any in. Do either of you, in the meantime, have any points that we might not have hit on in this discussion?
I actually thought that we're talking a lot about the pro versus amateur players. There's a thing.
I know what you're about to ask, and I think I'm very supportive of this question.
I think it's very important from a managing perspective that your coach do have the ability of evolving every player here, and that's what we've personally struggled with at a period, and I see other clubs struggle with as well, is that if you think you can bring in pro players but only have the coaching capacity of semi-pro or something, that's when you have the real issue. So everybody should be able to benefit from the whole project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the whole club that, you know, the coach sits in a pretty privileged or important position, but yeah, just like with the players, you have people who are part of the team, and that's the broader team of the club, who are not full-time professionals and who are needing to learn and grow and develop. So, you know, that's assistant coaches, that's people who want to be scouts, that's physios, team managers, all this stuff. To get that relationship and understanding right is a big benefit to the health of a club. And yeah, I know that here we've had stuff that's gone wrong, and the first phrase that comes out of my mouth has been, I can't be angry at volunteers. I can be frustrated with things that might not have worked perfectly, but I can never be angry at a volunteer because they're doing something for us for free.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of situations where the coach is the only, outside of maybe some players, the coach is the only full-time employee of the club.
Yeah.
And what we do see here in Scandinavia especially, that a lot of teams actually bring in pro players before a full-time coach, and that is that was really what gave us the last step up, was when we figured out we really needed to be certain that we have the facilities for everybody to grow.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. No more questions have come in, so I think we can wrap it up here. I want to thank both you guys. Thanks everybody in attendance for the questions that you put in.
Yeah.
I think it's been a good conversation. I got another one in about 4 hours.
You're a busy man.
Yeah, well, you guys will be asleep by that. I mean, it'll be an interesting conversation because it's a bit of mental training. But I think, you know, unless you're planning on taking a nap.
Well, I'll make sure I check it out on
Watch
Patreon.
the recording. There you go. Good pitch.
Thank you.
All right. Good night all to you in Europe, and talk to you later, all of you in the U.S. and beyond.